Hello, you found Hidden Trevor. Today we're going to continue on with Mysteries of the Unexplained. We're still in that first section, Beyond the Walls of Time. That section includes things like anomalies, prophecies, and coincidences. And boy, do we have a few of those for you today. The first one I want to talk about was actually featured on Beyond Belief Fact or Fiction, the TV show. And spoiler alert, it really happened. So there's some intrigue for you. Let's get into it. This story is listed in the book as Futility and the Future. In 1898, Morgan Robertson published a novella about pride, greed, and stupidity. It was called The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility, and it described the maiden voyage of a transatlantic luxury liner named Titan. That might sound familiar to you. Although reputably unsinkable, the Titan strikes an iceberg and sinks with enormous loss of life. In 1912, the Titanic, a transatlantic luxury liner widely touted as unsinkable, made her maiden voyage, struck an iceberg, and sank with enormous loss of life. So, this dude, in 1898, wrote a book about a ship sinking. So he basically predicted the Titanic thing happening. And that by itself wouldn't be so remarkable, but the details of the ship he describes in his book are just the Titanic to a T. So here's some stats from his ship, the Titan, versus the real-life Titanic. So he described the sinking happening in April, and in real life, Titanic sank in April. The Titan was supposed to have 3,000 passengers and crew. The real life Titanic had 2,207. Titan had 24 lifeboats. The real life Titanic only had 20. In terms of weight, the Titan was supposed to weigh 75,000 tons. Titanic actually weighed 66,000 tons. The length for each of the ships was supposed to be 800 feet for the Titan, and the Titanic was actually 882.5 feet. Both had 3 propellers, and at the time the ship hit the iceberg, the Titanic in real life was going about 23 knots. Titan was going 25. So that's a lot of similarities right there. Like, he got it down to a T. So, like, predicting a ship sinking, anyone can do that. I could say that right now. A ship will go to the bottom of the ocean tomorrow. But he got the specifications just right. So this Morgan Robertson guy, his background is ships. Yes, we are just reading off Wikipedia, but, you know, I see it as a totally reliable source of information, if you ask me. This Morgan Robertson guy, he's the guy who wrote the book. He was a cabin boy and in the merchant service, and he got sick of the sea life, it looks like. I don't blame him. He did write other stuff. He's just not famous for it. He wrote some book called The Submarine Destroyer. In that book, he described something that was a periscope, and he claims that he invented it himself. But it turns out some guy was right on the same idea just about 3 years earlier. So he is not the inventor of the periscope, and even if he did invent it, he didn't build one, so he's just a guy writing stories. At the time, though, he didn't know he would become famous later for a story he already wrote, so I don't blame him. If predicting the Titanic sinking wasn't enough, he also included a short story called Beyond the Spectrum within a newer version of that story of the ship sinking in 1914. Which described a future war between the United States and the Empire of Japan. He did not invent that idea, though. It was a popular subject at the time, according to Wikipedia here. Japan doesn't declare war, but instead ambushes the United States. So he was kind of onto something. This guy wasn't exactly clairvoyant, I don't think, but I think he had a pretty smart brain in his head, and was just kind of in tune with things going on. So I this guy deserves a lot of credit for feeling the vibes correctly, I guess, out there and writing them down. At the end of the day, I think most of his accuracies with his story boil down to him just kind of knowing what he's talking about in terms of like ships and his background. So good for him. It does kind of seem like like most artists, he didn't really get to appreciate his success because he died in 1915. Bummer. He just became famous for his short story or his novella. So that's a bummer. But he is immortalized now for being the guy who thought of that thing happening. In a similar vein to how Morgan Robertson predicted the Titanic sinking, an American journalist in 1918 made a prediction about World War II happening right as World War I was wrapping up. The guy's name was Eugene Lyle Jr. You can kind of see that image there. That was on the cover of Everybody's Magazine in 1918. And basically he just predicted that after World War I, Germany was going to retool and figure out a way to get back to a place of being like, a threat, and would bring on World War II. So this guy was pretty smart in foreseeing that. But I think just kind of like Morgan Robertson, he was just kind of in the know, like he was in tune with what was happening. He made a prediction that isn't like the craziest prediction in the world. I mean, you can imagine how right on the heels of World War I, you might be thinking, well, Germany is gonna, start some crap again. Like that's not like that much of a crazy prediction. He was right about some details, like he was right about things like arms and raw materials being stockpiled, soldiers and pilots being trained in like youth camps and gun clubs and flying clubs. And German scientists did develop new weapons. They sure did. And Hitler's victims were woefully unprepared for it. Hindsight is 2020, but yeah, Europe probably should have been a little bit more prepared for shenanigans happening the second time. But, okay, with those first two stories, they for sure happened. The stories were published before the event happened. And they both just boiled down to really good predictions. Which, big deal, right? Well, how about actual time travel? Okay. Enter Sir Victor Goddard. Okay. He was in the Royal Air Force, and one day he was flying over Scotland. This would have been 1934. And he was a bit lost, so he's looking for a landmark, so he dips his biplane beneath the clouds to get a lay of the land. He sees Drem, which was an old abandoned airfield in, Scotland. But when he saw it, it wasn't exactly abandoned. Then something extraordinary happened. Quoting directly from the book here. Suddenly, he wrote later, he wrote this, the area was bathed in an ethereal light as though the sun were shining on a midsummer day. And then all of a sudden, Drem is not deserted. There's a bunch of activity happening down there. Mechanics were in blue overalls, and the planes were painted yellow. Okay. This was unusual at the time because RAF mechanics wore tan overalls, and airplanes, like training planes at the time, were silver. So, some discrepancies with what should have been things he would have been able to see. He was flying real low. Apparently, he was only 50 feet off the ground, and he was surprised no one looked up at him. So he went and headed back up at a higher elevation, or altitude, I suppose. So fast forward 4 years, just as the other guy predicted, there was a war going on in 1938, as it happens, and that would be, World War II. By that time, Drem was reopened as an airfield because, the threat of war was reaching Britain. And by that time, mechanics in the RAF, they switched over to blue overalls, and training planes were changed from silver to yellow. So the working theory here is that Victor Goddard entered some kind of time slip and wound up in the future for a second. Ain't that crazy? That's really wild. The details of the overalls and the colors of the planes, that would be something that's pretty hard to predict, I would think. But it does kind of boil down to his account and no one else's. It is worth noting that this is not the first or last supernatural kind of thing that Victor Goddard dealt with in his life. Prior to that, when he was in World War I, there are some accounts that say in his photo, he was on the HMS Daedalus, and they took a group photo, and supposedly you can see a ghost over his shoulder. Now, personally, I think it's probably just someone who happened to be standing behind him. Some people say that it's someone in particular who was dead. Now, I don't think that's very good evidence for ghosts. I mean, it's literally just a photo, and someone probably moved while they were taking the photo, because if you know anything about photographs back then, you had to it was like a long exposure, so you could move around and it would mess up the photo. So I don't think there's anything weird about that in particular. After he, had the time slip thing, later in life, he was on board. It was sometime in the 50s, and he was on a ship of some sort, and the captain had a dream where he was flying a plane, and then it got real chilly, and his plane froze over, and he landed. And that's pretty much what happened to him. He was in Japan somewhere, and he had an incident where he was flying with passengers, and the plane froze over, and he had to crash land. But he did survive, whereas in the dude's dream, he died. So, interesting little premonition there. If someone had a dream where I died, I'd like them to tell me how, so maybe I could avoid it. That's awesome. But, yeah, so a couple strange occurrences through this guy's life. He did go on to become like a UFO guy, which tracks, he experienced something, a little supernatural, maybe, you kind of make that your whole thing. But it's important to keep in mind that, later on he wrote a book, and you make money off a book, right? And he's doing his UFO, he got into ufology, okay? So that kind of became his thing. I think that's a little suspicious, because think about it this way. You assume he might have relayed some sort of experience in the years between 1934 and 1938, but none of that would have been, him seeing the airfield active wouldn't be, confirmed a thing until afterward, right? So we need to figure out exactly when he first relayed this information. Well, I'm incredibly disappointed. So one quick Google search later, and it seems as though Victor Goddard first publicly shared this time slip story in his 1975 book, Journey Out of Time. That's that book I mentioned a second ago. So, in other words, he made the story up, bro. Like, he just made this up. This ain't even... I mean, he just told a story, and, you know, even after 1975, I think because he's a well-respected guy, he's in the, you know, the Royal Air Force, you know, everyone likes him. He's a dude with a lot of clout and, I don't know, respect that the public, that is, kind of just take his word for it. And plus, it's an exciting story. Everyone wants it to be true. But are you kidding me? The first time he shared the story publicly was like 30 years later, 40 years later. You know, hindsight's 2020. So yeah. Now, if he had shared this in 1935, like the second he landed his plane, then he'd have some credibility. But no, let's wait a whole bunch of time later. I'm mad. Because just like anyone else, I want to believe, I want things to be true, but man, this is disappointing to find out. And the first time he shared this was over 40 years later, when he would have the knowledge of the colors that they switched to with the overalls and planes. Why would anyone take this story seriously at all? I don't know. In popular culture, I think it's the basis for an episode of The Twilight Zone and things like that. Again, it's an exciting story. Everyone would want it to be true, but it looks like it's just totally bogus. So, if I was Jonathan Frakes in Beyond Belief Fact or Fiction, this is when I would tell you it's fiction. We made it up. It didn't happen.
It's false. No way. Not this time. We created it. Not this time. No.
Okay, so that's all I have for you today. I hope that was interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, comment, subscribe. I hope that was a good blend of stories for you guys. I think it's safe to say that the ones where someone published something before it happens are a lot more credible than someone publishing something after it happened. And just like with anything, if it boils down to one guy telling a story, it's probably not true, no matter how credible they may seem. And even then, eyewitness testimony is notoriously terrible, but you know, we move on. Check my future uploads for more Mysteries of the Unexplained. I may continue with Beyond the Walls of Time. It just depends if I can find any more interesting stories in there. I know there's at least a couple other ones, but a lot of them do just revolve around coincidences and things of that nature, which I think are definitely interesting. But when you boil it down, it's like, well, it's not anything more than a coincidence most of the time. But who knows? Maybe there are little holes in the fabric of reality that knowledge can slip through. I doubt it, but, you know, it'd be cool. Anyway, have a good day. I hope to have you here for the next video. Thank you.